It is my pleasure to welcome my former colleague back from my Paxton radio days. And of course, he is a longtime reporter and anchor for CBS News Radio. Peter King is here with us. Peter, it's great to have you back on the show.
Oh, nice to be back, and nice to hear the sounder. I almost started to start a newscast right there.
Yeah, I thought that would surprise you a little bit. Boy, you were
There you go.
you were launched. You were ready to go. I could tell.
Absolutely, and I'm sitting in the big chair where I do the work.
That's outstanding as always. And we will talk a little bit about your exploits at CBS News as well as your coverage of the space program. But we're going to talk a little sports first. And of course, you're one of the big baseball fans that I know of. And of course, 2023 going to be a bit different this year with some rules changes coming into play, amongst others, the banning of the shift, the pitch timer, and bigger bases. So what are your takes on these changes for the upcoming season?
Let me tell you a shift story, and this goes back a few years. Giancarlo Stanton was in one of his first years with the Yankees. We went over to see him play the Rays, and the Rays, of course, shifted on him every time. Now, number one, I'm not a Yankee fan, never have been, never could be. Number two, not particularly a Giancarlo Stanton fan, but in that day, and this must have been about, it feels like it must have been about 10 years ago. I know it's probably more recent than that. He beat the shift 4 times. And I was so happy to see that. You know, I remember the shift going back to as late as the late 1960s. Gil Hodges with the 69 Mets used to do what they call the McCovey shift, 4 outfielders, and it worked for them. I just think that the shift has become overdone, and I guess in that way I'm very happy to see it over with. I think it's hurt hitters. I think they've had to alter their swings, and look, I know baseball is a game of adjustments. You're always making adjustments, but when you're making adjustments that totally screw up your game, I think that's a bad problem. I think it will make the games a bit more competitive. Yes, it's a tool that managers will no longer be able to use. Sorry, I'll be happy to see how it works. And, you know, if it winds up staying no shift, or if they wind up altering the rules again down the line in the next few years to say, okay, you can use a shift X amount of times per game.
Okay. Yeah. That's, because, I certainly hate the shift. I do kind of feel like it isn't really fair to tell a manager he can't. If you want to put, 7 guys on the outfield, go for it, right?
Yeah, and then bunt.
Yes.
Bunt, get a triple out of it.
Yeah. Because I always look back at, like Rod Carew and George Brett and Tony Gwynn, they would have laughed at the shift.
Yeah. They would have, and so would have a whole lot of other players. I mean, Willie McCovey, who I mentioned earlier, he would have given the shift the middle finger, and he often did.
Yeah, no question. So that is one of the changes in that respect. So the pitch clock. So I know there's been some experiments with that, and I know in the minor leagues they say that has helped the pace of play, which is a big deal for people who want to maximize their time, I guess. What's your thoughts on that?
I saw a number of minor league games last year with a pitch clock. I liked it. I'm glad that finally MLB is going to go with it. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, first of all, 30 seconds max between batters. I think that makes sense, unless, of course, you have a mound visit. 15 seconds on the pitch clock with the bases empty, 20 seconds with base runners on. I think that's reasonable. I mean, remember Mike Hargrove, the human rain delay at the plate? Yes. We've had enough human rain delays on the mound over the years. It's time to do this. I can remember when baseball games lasted a couple of hours, and now for a lot of fans, anything over 3 hours is interminable. I don't have a problem with game length. The game is the game, and I hate fooling with the game, but I think this is an adjustment that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, as far as that goes, I know they had talked about, making sure batters stay in the box, and they never really enforced it. I
Well,
think
I
that
mean,
might be another just yeah.
that's like trying to enforce coaches staying in the coaching box by third base,
Yeah.
and I still see them halfway down the line. But here's the thing. I talked with a number of minor league pitchers who have worked with the pitch clock over the past couple of years, and they all told me, hey, it's not a big deal. Not a big
Mm,
deal.
yeah. I think it's probably the older veterans in the major leagues that are going to probably be the ones who squawk about it the most, I would imagine.
I think you may be right, and it's going to be interesting to see what their reaction is. But I'm looking forward to seeing the pitch clock in action.
Yeah, no question. And then they're going to have bigger bases. So this will be an interesting concept because, it might lead to more steals potentially. Got a little less distance between first and second base. Um, and maybe a safety precaution for plays at plays at the base. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand the safety precaution. Remember the play between the Phillies and the Mets a few years ago, where the Mets had a second baseman. I want to say it was Tejada who had his leg broken when Chase Utley slid hard. I don't know if this is going to make a difference in player safety. I also don't know that it's going to make a difference in increasing the running game because, I mean, somehow I hear Maury Wills and Lou Brock and Vince Coleman and Ricky Henderson saying we didn't need those stinking bigger bases. They all stole well over 100 bases in a season. I'd love to see more of a running game. That's something that's totally disappeared, and that will be exciting to see if that indeed materializes.
The one thing I would like to see them do is the old softball thing where they have the base in on the other side of the foul line for the runner to hit. I think because I it seems to me there are more and more close calls of runners and the first baseman coming to collision.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that. And when you started to mention softball rules, I thought you were going to be talking about the mercy rule or something like
No, no mercy rules. Let's see 20 runs. I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Of course, you are a big Mets fan, probably the biggest Mets fan I know, and I work with a couple of my day job.
my buddy is here with me.
Mr. Met.
Yep, and here in the big chair office, we have a number of pieces of Met memorabilia. So yes, and let me just say that I am drinking out of my official World Series 2000 Subway Series cup. I went to Game 4, so
Okay,
and brought
nice.
this all the way back to Florida from New York. What kind of idiot brings a plastic cup back from New York?
A diehard. That's exactly right.
And it holds water as well as any camel.
Yeah, there you go. So you've met all the important criteria there.
There you go.
So the Mets were Carlos Correa signed with virtually every major league team in the offseason, it seems like.
He signed with the Marlins last week, didn't he?
so he eventually ends up back in Minnesota, but he was in the equation with the New York Mets, and was it buyer's remorse? A couple of teams balked at his quote unquote medical exam.
Well, first of all, I've got to say that it was kind of fun to watch Scott Boras, the super agent, go from $350 million to $200 million. One of the few times we've actually seen him take a loss with any player contract, but $200 million is nothing to sneeze at. Buyer's remorse. We still haven't seen the exact medicals, and I don't think we ever will see the exact medicals on his right ankle. And there is so much conflicting information out there between what the Giants found, what the Mets found. And I believe they used the same orthopedist in going over the medicals there. My feeling was and is and always will be, if in doubt, get the hell out. It's what the Giants did, and it's what Steve Cohen did with the Mets. The interesting thing with the Giants is that they hesitated the day before they were having the press conference to introduce Correa as a San Francisco Giant. The
Yeah.
Mets, this went on for like 4 weeks. 4 freaking weeks, which was unbelievable. And by the second week, I can tell you that a number of Met fans I know were pretty much over it, and they said, "You know what? Let's just walk away from it." And I was one of those people who felt that way. If in doubt, get the hell out. And I think it was a smart move by then. Now, here's the thing. Korea winds up back with the Twins. He had a good year with them, but not a career year with them, and opted to try and go for the big money. But he seemed very at home there, and they seemed very happy to have him there. And I think, the deal he's got there, I think this is going to be a good deal for them. I think it's going to be a good deal for him. And he doesn't totally lose out. He signed as a 6-year deal for 200 million guaranteed, but it can max out at 10 years and 270 million. It's not quite as much, but what the hell is 80 million among friends? I think he'll do just fine, and I don't think he'll be eating his dog's food for dinner anytime soon. And I hope he does well there. I think he's a terrific player. Would I have liked to have seen the Mets get him? Yeah, that would have been pretty cool. But they did all right as it was. And, again, I hope he does well with the Twins. I'm glad he's not playing the National League and not in the National League East.
Yeah, there you go. So give me your scouting report, your rundown on New York Mets baseball 2023. What do you expect this season?
Holy crap. I mean, can I tell you something? It's like a QVC shopaholic sitting in front of the TV all day with a credit card. And I'm looking at the list, and I had to double check the numbers. The Mets payroll is now in the neighborhood of $355 million, and they're going to start calling this the Steve Cohn tax for the Mets owners. But wow, Verlander, Nimmo, Kodai Senga, pitcher from Japan, Ottavino, Tommy Pham, Omar Narvaez. Did I mention Nimmo?
Yeah, you did.
They extended Jeff McNeil. They avoided arbitration with Pete Alonso, and he's going to make $14.5 million. And who knows, maybe he'll wind up with an extension. They made some amazing additions over the winter, and it's going to be one hell of a lineup if you know where this is going. You want to say it with me? If they stay healthy.
Yes. Yeah, that's always the big thing. You can have depth, but when you have that many stars, with any of those guys miss time, you have bigger pieces to replace.
Well, and they've got 5 great starters here in Scherzer, in Verlander, and Senga. Those will be your top 3. Jose Quintana and Cookie Carrasco. Those are 5 great frontline starters. It's like, holy cow. They got a bullpen with Diaz, who was lights out last year, and Ottavino and David Robertson, and Drew Smith is in there, and they've got other candidates who could fit in there as well. And the starting lineup, I mean, catcher is up in the air because you got 3 guys who can compete. Narvaez, who just signed as a free agent, and I'm trying to figure that one out. He played with Milwaukee and had a good year. I think in 2019 showed a fair amount of power, but he hasn't matched that, and yet they signed him to 2 years and $15 million. So they know something I don't. They got Pete Alonso and Darren Ruff at first. Ruff had a rough time of it last year, but he's going to be an understudy and probably an occasional DH and whatever if he makes it out of spring training. McNeil, the squirrel, at second base. Third base is a really good question because you got Escobar, who had a really great September and did in September what they hoped that he would do all season long. He delivered with power. He got on base a lot. But you also got Brett Beatty, the rookie, came up for a little bit at the end of the season, and Mark Vientos, who has shown nicely at AAA. Shortstop, Lindor. Left field, Mark Canha. Nimmo in center. Marte in right. Vogelbach is your DH. Um, I'm not saying these guys are the 27 Yankees. They're not, but it's a great lineup. And if they stay healthy and, if they play up to their potential, it's going to be great. I mean, the one wild card in all of this, besides injuries, is you still have a team that won 100 games and washed out in the playoffs. And that's going to happen. And that happened with, I think, what was it? 3 100 win teams this past year.
My Braves being one of them, yes.
Yeah. And it's like a holy crap moment. How does that happen? And, it goes back to in a short series, anything can happen. And so, we're hoping that they get past that first round.
So are you disappointed or happy that DeGrom has moved on?
Who?
There you go. That
No,
answers my question.
no. You know what? It seemed evident for a long time that he was going elsewhere. I'm grateful as a fan for what he did with the Mets. But it's his prerogative as a free agent to do what he did. I hope he does well. I hope he stays healthy. I think it was a good move for the Mets not to re-sign him because he's had so many, so many health issues over the years. When he is on, there's nothing quite like him. But when he's on the shelf, he's not doing you any good. By the way, I was at the exhibition, the pre-exhibition game last year where he and Scherzer pitched
Ooh.
and down in Port St. Lucie, and that was an amazing experience. And I've seen DeGrom pitch. He is, when he's healthy, superhuman. And look, I hope he has a great rest of his career. I'm grateful for what he did as a Met fan. I hope he does well at Texas. And he obviously did what was a great fit for him and for his family. He's going to pitch for a great manager down there in Bruce Bochy, who I still can't believe decided to come back and get back into the fray again. But good for him. Good
Yeah.
for him.
And if anybody
Florida
can do anything
guy,
with the
by the way.
Rangers, he would be the guy.
Yeah, and Florida guy, he's from Melbourne.
Yes, yes.
So I wish him luck. The Texas fans, they're good baseball fans down there, and I think they'll have fun with DeGrom.
Yeah, that should be good stuff for sure. And then of course, the National League East will be another, last man standing to win the division. Of course, they got 3 into the playoffs last year, and what was considered maybe a couple of years ago the worst division is now the very best in the National
Well,
League.
you and I are old enough to remember a couple of cycles where they used to call it the National League least.
Yes.
So, you know what? It's a fun division to be rooting for a team in. And, I met Brian Snitker years ago in spring training, and as much as I have detested the Braves most of my life, and I hate that frickin' tomahawk chop, I have a tough time rooting against him because he's a really good guy and a great baseball man. And God love him, he's been with the Braves organization all of his career, almost 50 years, and his players swear by him. So, I hope they do well, just not at the Mets' expense.
Yeah.
Phillies, I've had a problem with for a while too, but they got everything they deserved. They deserved everything they got last year,
Hmm.
and I have no quarrel with. I have no quarrel with it whatsoever, and it's going to be a fun division to watch.
Yeah, and great point about Snicker. And I mean, that's one of those things when you see the word baseball guy in the dictionary, that's his picture, right?
Yeah, and we have to remember these guys are all human beings, and when you meet the enemy up close and personal, and you find out that he's a really good guy, well, you really want him to be a jerk, and he's not.
Yeah.
You can't root against a guy like that. He's one of the nicest guys in baseball, and he's a great manager. So there you go.
Yeah, no question about that. So, of course, we talk about your work CBS News Radio. And in fact, I am actually speaking to you because I know on social media you tell us when you're going to be in the big chair anchoring the hourly and bottom of the hour newscast, and you are actually in the big chair for this.
I am in the big chair, and the big chair is just kind of theater of the mind. It's a standard office chair like anybody else has, but it feels a little bit bigger when you hear the tone go off at the top of the hour and the sounder that you played at the top of our podcast here, and it's like, all right, baby. Well, you know what? For the next 5 minutes, we got to make it happen, and we got to make it as perfect as we can.
Yeah, it transforms into like the con on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it almost feels like warp drive because you're putting in a lot of stories at in a short amount of time and just trying to give people a taste for what's going on in the world. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
so
we're
yeah, so
a
tell me you
headline service,
yeah,
but
so you'll yeah, yeah, exactly. So you'll anchor, for a few hours. So tell me how your day starts and how you kind of get into that flow.
sure. Well, on a typical anchor day, and we should mention that I am now working happily freelance part time after 25 years as a full time correspondent, and that was an extremely important personal decision I made at this stage of my career because there's other stuff I want to do, but this lets me anchor 2, 3 days a week sometimes, and much more, say during the holidays when they really need bodies. And from your radio experience that part-timers are at a premium during the holidays.
Yes.
So we do the way it works is that if I'm anchoring, say on a Friday, my first newscast is a 1:31 p.m. update. It's a 60-second news brief, actually. But I'm in the big chair at 11:45 a.m. Part of my job is to put together a 60-second sports brief that goes out to our affiliates in the middle of the afternoon, and then start writing newscasts and putting them together one by one. And every hour is, every hour is a jigsaw puzzle. We have a finite amount of time in those top of the hour newscasts because we have to take breaks that are timed to work with, say, automation systems from our affiliates who take their local breaks and so on and so forth. So the timing's got to be perfect, split second, and it's basically a different jigsaw every half hour. 5 minute newscast at the top of the hour, 1 minute news brief at the bottom of the hour, and when there's breaking news, that makes it even more interesting. As you and I are talking, it's been a few days since the Air Force shot down that Chinese balloon, and that was our big breaking story on Saturday when I was on the air Saturday evening and Saturday night. So you always love having breaking news because that means people are paying attention. And, your job as a radio news anchor or reporter becomes that much more important.
Mm, for sure. And of course, you were, one of the preeminent journalists who has covered the space program over the years. And
Thank you for saying that. That's very kind of you.
yes, well, you certainly have earned your stripes on that side of the ledger for sure. And you know, recently we've had anniversaries of the two biggest tragedies that we had, and these are events that you always know where you were, when those things happen. Like, for example, the Challenger, January 28th, 1986. So I was working at WKIS at the time, very early in my radio career, and I was driving to the office, pull up in the parking lot. A few people are outside watching the launch, so I watch, and of course everybody kind of says, "Yeah, that exhaust smoke looks a little weird."
Yeah.
And so I go upstairs, and as soon as I hit upstairs, the newsroom is in full gung ho mode at that point, to cover the events of that day. Uh, it certainly was probably what the biggest tragedy since the '60s. It had been a very long time, and shuttle launches had become pretty routine, pretty regular. What is your recollection of that time?
I was in Syracuse, New York at the time, and it was before my journalism career, and I was a midday disc jockey on what we called a full service AM radio station back then, which meant we did adult contemporary music, but we had news at the top of the hour and a big news department and so on and so forth. I had been giving blood when it happened, and I came out in the car, turned on the station. Paul Harvey is on talking about the Challenger explosion, and that's how I found out. And I remember meeting a friend for lunch after that happened, and we were standing there looking at all the TV sets in a Radio Shack store next to where we were having lunch, and couldn't believe it. Um, I remember on the way home that afternoon listening to Jay Barbary on NBC Radio, because we weren't carrying wall-to-wall coverage, but our competitor was, and just listening in disbelief. Now, keep in mind that this was 19 years after the Apollo 1 fire, and the anniversary of that fire had been the day before, January 27th. So, that was top of mind for me being a space geek. And I remember getting home and sitting in front of the TV and watching the coverage, and never imagining at that point in my life that, the space shuttle was going to be an important part of my life down the road. So I remember that day very, very well.
Yeah, and of course, I know, since you've been covering the space program, of course, you also you have become a great historian in that regard, as far as the things that have happened in the space program throughout the years. So then, Columbia happens on February 1st, 2023. So this is just a few days ago of marking that
Yeah,
20
actually,
years.
2003, we
Yeah,
marked it.
2003. Yes,
Yeah.
pardon me. Yes. So 20 years. And of course, I remember my wife and I are walking the dogs down around the West Orange Trail in Apopka. And a guy on a bicycle, I guess, was listening to radio in his headphones, said, "Hey, did you hear about Columbia?" And said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, it blew up coming in." And
Yeah.
so, we finished walking the dogs. I get in the car, and then, I'm flipping on. There's Peter King covering the events of that moment. And so, yeah, your time in covering the space program, that has to be one of those. Obviously, it's a key moment in your career, but it's also one of those that just has to, break your heart at the same time.
Oh, you just nailed it. I remember that morning very, very clearly, because when I put the headphones on to do a 9 o'clock live shot for our new 9 o'clock newscast, everything was fine, and I said so on the air. I pulled the headphones off and I'm listening to the air to ground traffic, and I'm hearing Capcom Mission Control calling up to Columbia and getting no answer. And I'm listening for 2 or 3 minutes of this. I walk into the TV studio next door to my radio studio, where my colleague Bill Harwood is sitting. And he had been exchanging messages with a couple of people, unbeknownst to me, but he knew, had an idea what was going on. He looked at me and he said, "Dude, I don't think they're coming back." I'll never forget that as long as I live. We took air just a few minutes later. We were the first network radio operation to report that something had happened. I mean, landing time came. There was no landing. There were no sonic booms. There was no nothing, and we're basically flying without a net, depending on NASA to tell us what's going on. And when you're in that kind of situation, yes, the pit fell out at the bottom of my stomach, because 7 people were lost in those moments. And then you have to kind of shift into the mode of, okay, we got to keep it together, and we've got to tell the story as best as we can, not speculate about what happened, ask the right questions, wait for the information to tell the story. And, wild speculation does not work. And a lot of people like to throw stuff up against the wall to see what sticks. And I can remember one of the questions I asked. We got an expert on the air with us who is a good friend to this very day. He was putting his pants on and had one pant leg on when he called, and he stayed on the air with us with half his
Oh,
pants on the floor because he's trying to listen and watch with us. And I remember asking, is it possible that some kind of terrorist act could have brought this down, for example, a cruise missile or something like that? And, he answered right away, well, unlikely because they were so high. But I mean, remember, this was a year and a half or so after 9/11 had happened. So
hmm.
those are some of the things that are going through your head, crazily enough.
Yeah.
It was an unbelievable time. And I've said this often, and um, it was a horrific story to cover because people died. It was an incredibly great story for me to cover because I got to cover it from start to finish. The flight from launch to Columbia's demise at the end, and the entire investigation that followed. And keep in mind, the Iraq War is getting ready to start up a few weeks from the time this happens.
Mm.
And even with a 6-week break to help with Iraq War coverage, I got to cover most of the investigation and the hearings and this and that all the way until they came up with a final report that August in Washington. And it was one of the most incredible journalistic experiences of my life. And then beyond that, the process of returning to flight, all the things that they had to fix, all the things they had to change, all the things they had to learn how to redo that they had kind of forgotten to do, like listen to their people and that kind of thing. So it was it was definitely a defining moment for me, career wise and in my life, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah. It's interesting too because when you speak to how things like this affect you personally, so like with Challenger, so my dad was an engineer with Martin Marietta back in the day. He worked on the first external tank for the space
Wow.
shuttle,
Yeah.
and of course, I called him during the time of the Challenger accident, and you know they had heard internally there about the problem with the O-rings before it was even released or broken on the air.
Yeah.
And in when I was talking to him that day, I always remember how sullen he was because everybody with the space program, it touches many people far and wide, and he was just devastated
Well,
by
and
what happened.
people who live here in Central Florida, this is very, very personal to us because this is all happening in our backyard. These, the space workers, the astronauts, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's here in front of us. It's not just a TV show.
Yeah. And of course, a few years ago, you did a great program, 1 hour special on the Apollo anniversary. So One Giant Leap Revisited. And tell me, because this is another pride thing for Central Florida, a pride thing. This is a great thing you got to be involved with. You know, kind of recap for me what that special meant for you.
Oh wow. Well, you know what? I was 12 years old when Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. I was a certified space geek by then, very much so. And to be able to honor Apollo 11 on its 50th anniversary was an incredible thing. I mean, once in a lifetime for me because we don't do a lot of documentaries and stuff like that. It's mostly spot news and newscasts and reporting and stuff, but I got the okay to go ahead and do it. So I had a couple of archive interviews that were wonderful, and I did a whole bunch of new interviews that were fantastic. And people we talked to who were involved in the program, who later were still involved with the shuttle program. We talked to three kids, three of the Apollo 11 kids, and that was pretty cool. Rick Armstrong, who was Neil's son, Andy Aldrin, who lives in here in Central Florida, who was Buzz's son, and Michael Collins' daughter. And we did a segment in there. What was it like to be an Apollo 11 kid? And can I get up just for a second because I
Yeah,
want to go
please.
grab something?
Sure.
Okay, hang on a second because it's right over here.
We will
I
do some
spent
theater of the mind here.
I spent a Saturday morning in my garage looking for something desperately that I thought would be fun to use. Now, this is a cassette tape.
Ah,
It is from 1969. And what it is on the night of the moonwalk, we were getting ready as a family to fly away on a vacation from Kennedy Airport in New York. But CBS had set up a big screen in the international arrivals terminal. And I stood there for 4 hours to watch, and I had my brand new cassette recorder. So as a 12-year-old, I was playing reporter and describing what went on.
oh wow.
And I had the play-by-play of when Armstrong stepped on the moon with this little high voice that says, "Armstrong is on the moon. We've beaten the Russians." And I was able to use a snippet from that in the program, and that was, I felt like it was a major victory when I found this. But putting the whole thing together, trying to tell the story in ways that maybe it hadn't been told before, and we didn't focus a lot on Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. We focused on a lot of the other people who were part of it. I had an interview with Jack King, who was the launch commentator, who talked about what it was like, driving up to the Launch Control Center that day. I talked with Terry Rowan, who was a one-time reporter who was selling with her Girl Scout troops, selling donuts across the way in Titusville. I talked with my college roommate who described what it was like watching the launch from summer camp down in Sebring. Things like that. Bob Seek, who was later a shuttle launch director, who told us he actually had the day off from NASA because he was working on Apollo 12.
Wow.
We went to Houston and saw the remodeled Mission Control Room, which is now as it was during Apollo 11. And Bill Harwood and I sat for a half hour with Gene Kranz, the legendary flight director, who happened to be the flight director during the landing, and got some wonderful comments from him. We did a number of segments that were, sidebars, unsung heroes who you might not have thought of. And that was a lot of fun too. And this is still out there.
Yeah.
If you Google the title, as you so aptly mentioned a little while ago, One Giant Leap Revisited, and CBS News, you'll find it out there, and hopefully you'll find it worthwhile. It was the hardest thing I've ever put together, and it was so rewarding to have put it together.
Yeah, based on what you've just told me about all the things you did, how to fit all that into an hour.
It was hard, and that's a really, remember what I said before about putting the newscast together is like putting together a jigsaw? Well, they said, okay, section A has to be X amount of minutes and seconds. Section B, same thing. We wound up doing 5 sections, and they all had to be timed out perfectly.
That's
And
some.
guess what? We hit the mark.
That's tough work. It's
Really tough work, but it was so worthwhile. And I just remember uncorking a bottle of champagne when it was all over because and put to bed and in the system. It was like, wow. I don't know if I ever want to do that again.
With that champagne, did you celebrate like it was a world championship?
No, we actually drank
it. Well, there you go. Of course, space coverage, things are coming up in this calendar year.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of give me some thoughts on what we can expect to see from over on the coast.
Let me tell you, we've got what looks like, if everything goes according to plan, 5 human space flights, Four of them would be SpaceX. One of them would be Boeing. So here's what we got. Forgive me, I'm going to put my reading glasses on here. When does this podcast go up, actually?
Okay, so I'm recording on a Tuesday evening, and we'll probably put it out on Wednesday evening. So
Oh,
it'll be
that's
on the
good.
8th.
Because we've got one going on later this month, which would be no earlier than Sunday morning, February 26th, which will be the Crew 6 rotation flight that takes the next crew members up to the International Space Station. We have a couple of private space missions that SpaceX will fly. One possibly as early as March, called Polaris Dawn. And you may remember Jared Isaacman from a couple of years ago, the Axiom 1 mission that he paid a lot of money to fly. And it was the first uh, all civilian space flight and private space flight. Well, he's funding this one as well, and this would happen in March sometime, no earlier than. In May, Axiom 2, which will be, you know what, I had that wrong. It wasn't Axiom 1, it was Inspiration 4 was his flight, forgive me. Axiom 2, which is another private space flight, could fly in May, and that's actually going to be commanded by former space station commander Peggy Whitson.
Hmm.
So that could happen in May. And then the seventh crew rotation mission would fly sometime this fall. Now, in the middle of all of that comes April, Boeing Starliner, which is their crew capsule that was supposed to fly 2 years ago, but because they had a software problem and mistakes and had to rejigger everything, they're way behind schedule. But they are hoping to fly their Starliner in April with astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams aboard, two space shuttle and space station veterans. And on top of that, NASA is working on Artemis, which is what they call their moon program. A few months ago, or just a couple of months ago, we had the launch of that mammoth moon rocket. They're preparing for Artemis 2, which would be a crew mission. It would carry 4 astronauts around the moon sometime late next year if things go as planned. And we're expecting sometime in the next few weeks, we're expecting to find out exactly who will fly that mission. They haven't named the crew yet publicly, so that is supposed to happen. Now, on top of that, there are going to be a whole lot of other launches that are uncrewed launches. SpaceX is looking to launch in the neighborhood of 100 rockets this year between here and Vandenberg Space Force Base out in California. They launched, I believe it was 57 in 2022. So they're really stepping it up, and they're proving that their business model really does work.
Yeah, that's quite a story, indeed. And you just look at the fact that, it's been great to see all this renewed interest in space exploration and whatnot.
Well, it's an exciting time to be in the space business, and I think a lot of people forget that there's a space station up there and that it's been up there, for some 23 years and change. But the problem is, space station doesn't go anywhere; it goes around the Earth, round, round, and round and round. I think when we start talking about sending people out there to the moon again, that might generate even a little bit more excitement. The private space industry, there is so much going on. And I can remember back when they were retiring the shuttle, and so many hardliners who, thought NASA way was the only way to do it. And they were waiting for SpaceX to fail, and SpaceX has not failed. Elon Musk has really designed a good business model in terms of and reusability and speed. And so far, no corners cut, and his vehicles have flown very safely.
Yeah, it really is what you define a game changer, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could put SpaceX right next to that phrase in the dictionary. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Boeing, it's going to be interesting to see how well Boeing keeps up in terms of how many flights they make every year. SpaceX has this down, forgive the pun, to a science. Uh, Boeing, in many ways, has been used to doing things the way that they've been doing them for decades and decades and decades. It's a much bigger corporation with much more red tape to cut through, and they've had other problems as well, which have compounded everything. So you hope that they can get on track, because quite frankly, the more players you have here, the better it is. The other thing we ought to mention involves the Russians, because there was a leak aboard the Soyuz spacecraft that is there now as a lifeboat, and they're going to launch an uncrewed Soyuz that was originally planned to bring space station astronauts, cosmonauts up in the next few months. Instead, they're going to send that up to replace the damaged spacecraft. So that's happening too.
Wow, it's a busy, busy calendar. That's for sure. If you
It really is, and you can't tell the players without the scorecard. So, make sure to write it down, and keep your programs handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you for letting me tap into the great space knowledge that you were able to partake with us there. That was awesome, and I would say good luck to the Mets. I really can't. We will have to be frenemies on that part of the world, but
Mr. Met and I do not hold that against you.
yes. So yes, so thank you, and Mr. Met, and your 20-year-old plastic cup for for being part of the program. It's
Indeed.
always a pleasure to talk to you, Peter. I appreciate it.
Jeff, it's never often enough, and it's always fun. Thank you for having me on.
Let's see here.